okay, we're halfway through and they have not gone on the quest. So what is getting cut? And then my next note is, oh, the whole quest. What's good? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Newest Olympian. My name is Mike Schubert. I'm the titular Newest Olympian. I'm a 32-year-old man. First time I've said that one. Recent birthday boy who never read the Percy Jackson books as a kid. I read them as an adult. And then I did a bunch of other stuff like reading spin-off books and watching the TV show. And now I'm watching the musical. I'm on this big quest to determine if the world has been sleeping on the Percy Jackson series. And I'm here with a very special guest to not only discuss Act 2 of the Lightning Thief musical, but also the phenomenon that was the social media of the Lightning Thief musical. What better person to talk to than Mix Thief themselves, writer, social media director, and Tony Award-winning theater producer, Ashlee Latimer. Ashlee, how's it going?
Good. How are you? Happy belated birthday.
Thank you. Thank you. Truly, I was not doing that as a fishing of compliment. It was just, I realized I say my age in the intro sometimes, and it is now March. Thank you. I appreciate that. But I'm so excited to have you back on the podcast for an incredibly relevant episode, since this is, a lot of the way that Percy Jackson folks know of your existence. Before we get into any of that, though, because you're a repeat guest, we get to ask the repeat guest question.
Oh, great.
Which cabin would you be sorted into? I don't know if you've taken any of the official or unofficial quizzes, or if there's just one that feels true to you.
I go back and forth on this a lot. Where I've landed of late is I think that I would be in the Hermes cabin, because I think I would be really good at being part of the, you don't know where you belong yet, probably, welcome committee.
I love that. I love that a lot. As someone who majored in engineering and now does this as a full-time job, I'm very pro you don't have to figure your life out kind of thing.
Right.
I'm all for that. Before we get into discussing Act 2, I did want to talk about your work doing the social media management for The Lightning Thief, which I obviously don't regret not being a Percy Jackson fan earlier, because it has allowed me to have one of the coolest jobs ever. But I do wish that I could have been in the mix of this, because it sounds right up my alley from things that I've read about. And I think there's no better summation of it than the social media section on the RiordanWiki page about the Lightning Thief
I have
musical.
not seen this.
4 bullet points, and it's great. So it says, the social media accounts were run by Ashlee Latimer. The identity of who was behind the accounts was a secret until January 6th, 2020. A better January 6th. Anyone running the Lightning Thief social media is referred to as Mix Thief in order to keep their identity a secret. A new Mix Thief will be taking over for the accounts for the musical's second tour. Ashlee was known to be very active with fans, especially on Twitter. That's the whole summation. Is that a pretty good, accurate summary, or do you have anything else to add?
I feel like it is. That's great. I don't know how I've missed that, but I've never seen that before.
Yeah, I looked to see if you had your own dedicated page on RiordanWiki, and though you don't, you do have this, subsection that is mostly about you.
I'll take
it. But please, I would love to hear from your perspective, just what was the history that got you into this role, which then just became a whole nother thing?
Yeah, so I moved to New York in August of 2016 and started working at a theatrical marketing agency in January of 2017. And when I first started, I actually didn't know that The Lightning Thief was going to be one of my clients. And then I saw the announcement that Chris was going to be playing Percy, and we had worked together a little bit on other stuff. And I was like, oh my God, this is so fun. People love those books. And I love that Chris is going to be playing this role. And I brought that up in the office, and the owner was like, oh, they're going to be one of your clients. The only thing I knew about the Percy Jackson world at that point, because I started high school the year that the first book came out. So at that point, people were not really encouraging high schoolers to read middle grade books. Mm-hmm. So I just missed the boat. And the only thing I really knew about the world and the fandom was that they hated their movies.
I think you and I very similar paths, because I feel like we're similar age. We had the similar problem. And that is basically all I knew going into making this podcast, is people said, you'll like the books, everyone hates the movies.
Yes, exactly. And so I knew that I had to be on my A game, because even though I was not involved with the Percy Jackson fandom at all, I had definitely been a part of other fandom spaces, and I had seen other books and properties go through adaptations of various mediums. And I was like, if I'm going to be on the forefront of engaging with these fans, I don't think that anyone who's outside of musical theater has ever been like, oh, great, my favorite book is being turned into a musical. That is typically a path that people are like, why? And so I cleared my entire schedule that day and sat down and read the first book and basically came up with an entire social pitch for a meeting that I had the next day that I didn't know about with the producers. And kind of from jump, I definitely said we should take this in a really fan forward direction. Our main obstacle here is going to be convincing these fans to get on board with this adaptation. And if we just do run of the mill, here's the show, here's the actor, like they're not going to trust that we really know this property and love it. I had listened to demos from various iterations of the musical, and I had read the script. And so I knew, especially because I had just read the book, I was like, these people who are making this do really care about this book and this world. And so I need to make sure that I'm doing justice presenting that to the fans. So if you go way back into the archives of the Twitter and the Instagram and the Facebook, you can see that the first couple of weeks, it was very standard. And that was before I took over. And then the day that I took over, it like starts pivoting hard into like memes and engaging with fans directly. And I basically created this character that was part signature Riordan verse sass, part camp counselor, part older sibling. And it just grew from there. And no one had ever really, I think that there were some musical accounts that had gotten larger when the musicals got larger, and then people would just incidentally know who had been behind those accounts. But this started getting a lot of attention that we just didn't expect. And initially, Humans of Broadway, like a couple of weeks into the gig, they were like, it would be so fun to do a post. And for whatever reason, one of the producers was like, no, let's keep it a secret. Let's make it part of the thing. And I was like, okay, people probably won't care that much as we go along. It'll probably die out. And then it didn't. I worked on the rest of the off-Broadway run. We closed. I left that marketing agency. And then in the summer of 2018, I got brought back on by the producers independently to do the social media for the tour when it went out. Well, it didn't go out until like that winter, but we started rehearsals and stuff, of course, like late summer, early fall. That was just like when we finally had like a long enough run to really lean into things, to try really different ventures like the Half-Bloods Helping Half-Bloods campaign, where fans who were too far away to see the show but could afford to see the show could help sponsor tickets for fans who were close enough to see the show but couldn't afford it. And there were two fans within the group that created a Twitter account that was dedicated to that. It was such a bit of me like misremembering their names that now my brain automatically wants to call them names that we would make up. But they were really great. Alexa and Kelsey, I think, was the second girl, but they helped like organize a lot of that. And we had fans there's one fan, her name is Meryl. She's part of like the Dutch Half-Bloods, who became my personal assistant and would like just chime in with different anecdotes or like facts about things like the world. We famously for them made a change. Grover used to say that he wants to get a cheeseburger at one point, and we changed it to a veggie burger because one of them was like, he's vegetarian. Right. So we had just a really unprecedented level of engagement with the fans. And that lasted all the way through the tour. And then when we transferred to Broadway, I had thought the tour is over. My journey with the Lightning Thief world has come to an end. And I had accepted a completely different creative development, like full-time position in a producer's office, because on the side, I had been doing some co-producing work. And then we found out about Broadway. And the producers were like, there's no way we could train someone to like do this, like what you're doing for just this short amount of time. Like, could you please stay on? So from August until the show closed in January, so August 2019 until January 2020, I was working anywhere from like 80 to 100 hours a week. It was
God.
It's like I was a surgical resident. The fans would often joke, like, it seems like you never sleep. And I was like, I really don't. So yeah, I was working anywhere from 18 to 20 hours a day. But it was just I don't think I could have done that for a long time, but for that amount of time, it was a really cool, unique experience. And the fans were fantastic. And the identity stuff, once we were parked in one location for several months at a time, when we went into the Longacre, the fans were like, oh, we'll be able to find out who Mixed Thief is now because there'll be people going in and out of the same space. And one day, this actor, Joshua Rush, and I had coffee, and he'd been engaging with the account and wanted to post a photo. Like, I had coffee with Mixed Thief because he was coming to the show that night. And he posted a photo where he put a black box over me, but one tiny stream of pixels showed my shoulder.
No way.
And I had on a blue dress. And one little bit of my hair came out. They're like, okay, it's somebody wearing a blue dress with dark hair.
Oh
and so
my gosh.
In one of the most surreal days of my life, called up my best friend and I was like, I need you to go buy me a dress in any color but blue and bring it to my office so I can change before I leave the office and go to the theater tonight.
Oh my gosh.
Because people are expecting a blue dress. And so she bought me this sage green dress and we managed to keep it undercover. And it's so funny because those moments would happen where it was people in full FBI mode, but then no one ever looked at my bio in the playbill and thought, digital strategist, what could that be?
I wonder. Oh, who could that be?
And I was no one ever went down a channel of looking at and they've gotten more sophisticated because when the casting for the TV show was coming out, they were looking at who are different people following and stuff. But at the time, nobody looked and was like, this person is in photos with Chris McCarroll, George Salazar. So there were these weird moments of dodging intense scrutiny. And then other moments where I was I'm kind of in plain sight and nobody is noticing.
Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. So then we closed the show and I also thought that things were over then. And then of course, later I went on to do Rick's social media for a bit. And that's pretty much everything.
Yeah. Was the Rick thing, was it just straight up we loved what you did with the Lightning Thief? Please come on board and run my social media as well?
Yeah, I can't remember now what I DM'd her about, but I DM'd Becky to ask her a different question. And she was like, hey, well, I have you here. Rick's about to be
incredible.
On tour for his last I guess, no, it was in the pandemic. So it wasn't his last live stuff, but he was going to be still a very intense digital tour. And she was like, so he's not going to have a lot of time to do a social. Could we try it out for a month and see how things go? And that was a complete opposite approach. Instead of it being oh, some mysterious person has taken over Rick's, it was front and center. Rick was like, Ashlee's here, which was wild. But yeah.
Wild, but I think good and I think smart, especially given, I don't know, just observing the Rick Riordan social media thing is so fascinating. And I think of anyone to have comments locked, Rick Riordan makes so much sense. I think he's doing it very well. And I think the way they handled when you were running it as well, I think that all made so much sense. I did see, I was doing some prep before we talked here. There was a New York Times article about you and the whole Mixed Thief thing,
yes,
which was very fun. And I'll put a link to it in the show notes for this podcast if anyone wants to read it. But I think what's really fun is that they first called out one of the tweets that you posted when it was getting the initial Broadway reviews, which I think is fantastic. Quote, probably the funniest part of the bad reviews we got is all the hand-wringing over, quote, too many whiny teens. Considering that cishet middle-aged white men having crises over their adult life choices is the bread and butter of serious American theater canon. A+, no notes. But I just love it. I think it fits so well with the vibe of this show, because if you have a show like this where it's more kind of a simpler production that is okay at poking fun at the books it's based off of as well as itself and doing low budget type things where the water power is going to be leaf blowers with toilet papers on the end of it. I think if you had a more prim and proper professional social media, it would feel off base. So to have one that is going to be fun and fan interactive and not afraid to clap back at some sassy reviewers with some sass of their own, I think it fits so perfectly.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that was definitely an interesting moment for us because we did feel like it fit the brand and we wanted to take this moment to point out that it's not just that we got bad reviews. It's the way that the show was approached and the way the characters themselves were addressed, where it felt dismissive of very real developmental milestones that teens and tweens go through in general, and not just like it was critiquing the show itself, but critiquing like an entire demographic of humanity.
Yeah, I think it's whenever you get negative criticism, like I always accept it for the podcast, but only if it's valid. Like the only time I get really upset is when people say things that are untrue. When I did my Harry Potter podcast, I got a criticism where someone said the podcast was bad because I read multiple chapters ahead and I would know what's happening ahead of time. And I was like, the whole conceit of the show is that I never read past whatever we're recording. So it made me so upset. And then I got a recent review on the Newest Olympian where someone was like, oh, it lacks racial diversity. It's like, it's so upsetting given that I really try to get diverse voices on and this person just like assumed people's last names weren't diverse enough. Wild. So I can totally understand, like, say the show is bad. Don't say it's bad because of these particular reasons.
100%. Yeah. And I think that was a moment that there were lots of eyes that had not been on us that suddenly were, from different audiences than we were used to. And some people loved it. And it's been really interesting to watch how the overall conversation has developed around critics, around critique in theater since then. But at the time, people were only really starting to publicly have those conversations that it just kind of started. And so it felt very, again, unprecedented for us. And it was definitely a moment where we had to thread the needle, because there was some, as much as we got flack for it, we also got a lot of praise as well from various people. And then after that, there was a little bit of a push behind the scenes to make that our entire personality, so to speak. And I definitely had to finesse things and make sure that that we were staying within our brand by saying that, but that we were not going to just abandon the entire ecosystem and character and community we had created with the social media to just become an account that just takes down our haters.
Yeah, it has to feel genuine and like it's coming with the voice you've created for Mixed Thief and also, the overall voice of the show and the production.
Totally. Yeah, but that was definitely one of the moments where it felt like our social media left containment, so to speak, where suddenly there were people who had never seen any of our social media before, just seeing that tweet in isolation. And so it was a wild, wild, adventurous ride.
Well, pearls were clutched across the globe, I'm sure, but I'm glad that it happened. And even in this New York Times article, I don't know who the person was, but there was someone who feels like a Broadway person being like, yeah, you can respond to critics. Who cares? So totally. I appreciate that. People in the industry appreciated it. The last thing I want to say about the article that I think is so funny is there's a quote that says, Latimer is not much older than the primarily Generation Z fan base for The Lightning Thief, which I need to start using for me when I feel old. I would be like, well, I'm not much older than the primarily Generation Z fan base. But it continues. But there are enough years between her and her audience to have had what she calls Freaky Friday Crypt Keeper moments using acronyms and slang from her teenage years that no longer translate.
Oh, yes. I will never forget YN Gate. Because one time I posted, and I read fan fiction, so I knew about the usage of YN to mean your name. Okay. But I just also assumed that they would know about it in the context of choosing yes or no. And they did not. Okay. And so I tweeted something that was like, should we do blank or blank? Y/N. And people were like, oh my God, Matt. YN, Mixed Thief, what are you doing? I totally
would have only thought Y/N was yes/no. I never would. I mean, I've also only read one fan fiction, and that is My Immortal, because I read the best one, and then I was like, I'm done. Why would I ever open another one?
Yeah, there's a section of fan fiction that no judgment against anybody who does read it. I don't personally read it myself, but I know about it. That is supposed to be the reader is the main character. And so it just uses Y/N to mean your name anytime someone is talking to the character. So it'll be like Harry Styles being like, let's go back to my hotel room, YN.
As a grammar snob, I feel like the slash doesn't make any sense. Yeah. It should just be YN with no slash. So you are correct. Everyone else is wrong.
Thank you. Finally, validation after 6 years.
Look, and it's funny because I totally forgot, but there's a thing, you brought it up the last time you were on the show where you're particular about when to use an M dash versus an N dash versus a hyphen.
Yes.
And it's one of my favorite things that I don't think anyone's ever asked me about about it. It's like a running joke that I have with the Newest Olympian. Every episode before you were on, when I would do chapters like 1 to 2, I would do 1-2. And every episode since, I do the proper M dash, the medium-sized one for the range. And you could just, I thought at one point, like, should I go back and change them so it's all correct? And I was like, no, it'll be fun to have the pre-Ashlee episode with it technically being the wrong grammar. And then every episode past has it correct.
That is incredible. This is my legacy, and I'm so
You've cemented
honored.
it, and I'm glad that we can bond over grammar particulars as a person who uses semicolons in text messages. So now that this is all taken care of in terms of the history, let's get into Act 2 of Percy Jackson, the Lightning Thief musical. So where we last left our heroes, it was intermission, and they are about to go on the quest. And the first note that I have when I was watching this that I wrote down was, okay, we're halfway through, and they have not gone on the quest. So what is getting cut? And then my next note is, oh, the whole quest. But like, I get it, right? Like, there's only so much that you can fit in. So when you've devoted the first half of the play to just figuring out who Percy is and camp, like a bunch of stuff is going to get cut in the second act.
Totally.
There's only so much you can do.
And as is evidenced, I think now that everybody has a real good visual with the TV show, Rick certainly did not cut corners on the epic scale of all of the different places that we are going. And I think that while we figured out how to have waves and water on stage trying to do the arch and a bunch of other things that would have maybe been a step too far. I don't know if we could have recreated the Tunnel of Love.
Right. Tunnel of Love, the arch, the Amtrak trains, anti-Ms. Like, there's so many things that are going to be hard to do, especially when you're trying to thread that needle of looking convincing, but also being like that low budget feel. Because as I said in the previous episodes that we've posted about this, the stuff is still good. Like, it's still like high production in terms of like putting together the Minotaur and stuff like that, and the Oracle with the dress thing. Like, it's super fun. But yeah, if you're trying to make a big arch for what would be a really short moment, it's like a lot of work to like bring it in, make it, wheel it off. Like, I don't know. It's not like you had the budget of High School Musical 1 where you could have a giant paper mache moon that descended and ascended. There's only so much you could do. Right.
And of course, as is often the tradition in musical theater, they turned it into like a 7-minute musical number instead.
Which works. So yeah, when we come back, it is after the bus, and basically the trio has done the, oh my goodness, I can't believe we had the whole bus thing happen to us kind of time jump. And then we get the song, as you mentioned. We get a song about being lost in the woods and needing to go to Los Angeles. And as I've said on the previous episodes, I am not the biggest fan of musicals, like in general. Any sort of criticism that I have of the play, take it with like a handful of salt, because it is just not my particular style. This song wasn't my favorite, mainly just because it was the kind of song where it's not even like a negative thing. It's just, I knew it was going to get stuck in my head because they keep saying like, we're lost in the woods, like over and over again. And I was like, just dreading that I would have this stuck in my head for the next 4 days, which I did. So maybe it is a good song and I'm just a baby.
It's definitely an earworm.
Certainly an earworm. I do like there is a change where instead of having the whole gladiola thing, we have a talking squirrel, which I feel like is another change that makes sense in terms of like fake squirrel more believable than fake dog. I don't know if you have any insight to like what went into that change, but I think the whole talking squirrel thing was very funny.
Yeah, that definitely was the impetus behind that change, I feel, especially because there's a convention that's already been created that the actors will play a lot of the creatures. And I think having an actor playing a dog would have just been a little bit of a step too far. And it also just looks so silly to full on have this like fake squirrel just sitting on the step and then Sarah Beth behind it making squirrel noises.
Yeah, it's like funnier the more ridiculous it is, where like if you had like a stuffed animal dog, it would look like, oh, okay. But like when you've gone so silly with something so small as a squirrel, then you're like, okay, yeah, this is a great bit.
Right.
So it also allows for a fantastic dad joke from Percy where he says that the thought of talking to squirrels sounds nuts and really hams up the delivery of it, which is great. And then our team comes upon Medusa, and we get a little bit of the Uncle Ferdinand aspect of it. We get Medusa recognizing Annabeth's eyes to get the Athena of it. And then an interesting change is that we have Percy using the flying shoes to defeat Medusa instead of Grover having them, which I don't know exactly what went into that change in terms of Percy being the shoe bearer, but we do get the cool like flying effect, which, with people carrying Percy across, which is a good time.
I don't know why they made that change either, but I guess maybe just for the continuity of they put them in his backpack at the beginning. And yeah, I wish I had a better insight on that one, but
it is okay. You do not have to have answers for anything. You've given us so much information at the jump. Then we have, I'm trying to think of what is this note I have. Trying to recall my own notes. I said, Grover says she turned her into a monster. Hoo. Look, a bunch of empty boxes.
Oh,
I guess they're like figuring out the shipping.
Yes. And well, I imagine Percy and Annabeth start to get in a little bit of a spat. And then Grover is like, oh, I don't want to be part of this. Oh, look, let me go over here. So maybe that's what that's referring to.
Gotcha. Yeah. I think I just took this note down in particular because, again, this is just like a stylistic thing. I'm not a fan of like when the acting decision is just volume, and it just felt like there was a lot of yelling coming from Grover. And like, I totally understand it's like a teach their own thing, but I was like, bring it down. We're right here. But that's just me. But then on the flip, I did really enjoy the conversation between Percy and Annabeth because it feels so true to book form where you have Percy. I always loved that he was never afraid to ask uncomfortable questions. And we have Percy basically just asking Annabeth straight up, do you not like me because of our parents? True to book form, glad it found its way into the musical. And she clarifies that she doesn't hate him. And Percy says, well, you're very overly critical of me. And Annabeth says that she is trained and she has trained relentlessly. But Percy just shows up all of a sudden and gets a quest instantly. And he doesn't even know how to hold a sword. And then he says, yes, I do. And hits himself in the shoulder immediately and says, ow, which is great. And it's just like these kind of moments. I think the play did such a good job of, in a really short amount of time, taking large spans of the book and just making the essence really translate. And I think this is a prime example of it.
Absolutely. I agree. And I think that's just one of those moments too that shows off Chris and Kristen's dynamic so well. And I think also really helped with layering in this conceit that you have to suspend your disbelief that these are people in their 20s playing like 12-year-olds, but they really brought that sensibility to it. And I think this is one of those moments that showcases that.
Totally. So then Annabeth shows Percy how to properly hold it. They do a little bit of training, which is good because we didn't really get a whole lot of Percy training before leaving for the quest. So if he needs to defeat Ares in a fight, this would be helpful. Percy then wonders how Athena couldn't be proud of Annabeth, which is so sweet.
Yeah.
And then we do get something that I don't know that I really realized this until the musical said it, because I don't think it gets called out in the book. But Annabeth has a line where she says, oh, yeah, giving me a hat of invisibility is all too fitting. And I was like, oh, my goodness. Like, I didn't even realize that.
Yeah. I think it's a really cool moment of vulnerability for Annabeth because the hat so often is presented as this extra superpower, and it is certainly useful so much of the time. But this is one of those moments where if you're a kid and you haven't gotten to spend a lot of time with your mom and all you have of her is, these little moments, like, of course, you're going to overthink every interaction, every glimpse that you've gotten of her character. And how do you not jump to that conclusion that, like, well, why would she give me this if she didn't feel like making me invisible is a plus?
Yeah, no, I didn't realize it, and I really like that it found its way in there. Annabeth then starts to sing a song about being the smart girl, and she can sing. Like, I've well established in our episode covering Act 1 that Chris McCarroll can sing, but Annabeth has an incredible voice as well. I really enjoyed her singing this solo song. I thought it was fantastic.
Me too. I love that song, and that was a song that Rob initially had to really fight to find a place for, because especially when they were doing the one act, they weren't able to find a solo moment for Annabeth, but it was really important to him and to Kristen that that song make it in there. And it gives you so much of her character, which I feel like, because so much of the quest is streamlined, you really do need that interiority to cement her for people who aren't as familiar with the books, especially.
Yeah, I think it did a very effective job, and Kristen can totally sing. Her and Chris are really top notch.
They really are.
It's like a weird problem of the play of they are so good that everyone else, by comparison, it's like, oh, but it's like the two of them are just so good. They're so talented. So Annabeth and Percy resolve not to fight. Percy then has the idea to box up the heads, and then we get the classic quote, which is from the book, the musical, and now the TV show. The gods will say we are impertinent. Oh, we are impertinent.
Yes.
So I love that, like, across every iteration that is not the movie, we get the dedication to this moment finding its way through with that line specifically, and it's great. So Grover comes back with 3 Amtrak tickets from the squirrel, and then he sings more of an upbeat song about going on the quest and staying alive. And I enjoyed this one more, and I feel like the tune is very much like, it felt like a We're Going Across America tune. I don't know how else to describe it, except like it just felt like road trippy. I don't know. It just really worked thematically for me.
Oh, I totally agree. I have loved both iterations of that song. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to listen to the deluxe cast recording yet.
Oh, I have not. I didn't know there was a deluxe.
You're in for a treat, because there are like several cut tracks that we couldn't do a recording of, like a full cast recording with the tour cast / Broadway cast, but they wanted to give them some moments and also give people little Easter eggs. And you get to hear this track called In the Same Boat, that is the 1-hour version of what would eventually become Drive.
Okay, cool. I'll have to check it out. Chris might have mentioned it in the interview, but I'll have to do my deep dive of the soundtrack.
Yeah, oh, it's so good. And there's this song called Try and the bonus. One of my favorite songs of the entire show.
Okay, I'm excited. So then as the quest goes on, the chimera happens in what feels like half of a second, just like very brief. And you know what? It's a brief part of the book, so understandable. And then our trio starts to argue about how they should continue now that public transit has been shut down, and they realize that the arguing that they're doing is because Ares is there. So Ares comes out from behind on the scaffolding, and he offers to take them as far as Vegas on his motorcycle. And this is, again, a change that I feel like just makes sense for time constraint. I felt like with the TV show, there were certain things that, like, yeah, you got to do this. And this felt true to the musical as well. Like, are we really going to get Waterland, cheeseburgers, diner, all that stuff? Or is he just going to teleport them a bit further on his motorcycle? Which, again, like, what a cool little prop effect with like the handlebar with the light on it. Like, that's super fun. So when this change happened, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. And I thought it was fun.
Me too. I love just that whole section, because you just get these little tiny cameos, and the poor actors who were playing all of those roles were doing like 90 quick changes behind the scenes. But... Right.
And it's not just a quick change, but like, hi, can you do a quick change and also become Medusa? Like,
right.
It's not just like put on a shirt. Like, can you also put on these snake heads?
Right.
Thank you.
Be a totally different character.
What I also loved, and I don't know if this was an intentional thing or maybe I have unrose tinted glasses because I knew the plot twist, but when Ares gives Percy his backpack, there's like a stinger from the music. Yes. There's a musical like note when he gives him the backpack, which I guess if you don't know, you would think like, what a fun flourish, where if you know the plot twist, you're like, oh wow. Like,
right, totally.
The backpack.
Yeah, it's definitely a little Easter egg for the people who, if you know, you know.
Yeah. So then they also do that same stinger when they see the Lotus Hotel and Percy suggests entering. So I feel like maybe someone with some critical thinking skills could be like,
right.
The usage of the stinger.
Yeah, you start to connect the dots a little bit.
Percy then asks Bianca how long they've been there when they are considering going in, and she says that they've been there since 1939. And then Percy goes, okay, we can just sleep on the road. And I love this as someone who vehemently defended episode 6 of the Percy Jackson show because I didn't think the Lotus Casino was that big of a deal. I wanted to know, it seems like fans genuinely love the musical. Were they mad that Annabeth knew right away that it was a trap? Because everyone seemed to be all up in arms, myself included. Everyone got all flustered about them knowing it, but like, I don't know. So I guess this would be a question that you'd be more aware of. Like, were people upset, even in air quotes, about like the changes that were made? Or were people more like, yeah, it's a 2-hour musical, we're going to have to change a whole bunch of stuff?
I think people over the years definitely like would be like, oh, I'm sad that they cut insert my favorite thing. But by and large, people were like, we understand that this would have been a 5-hour musical if they had kept more in.
Yeah, I guess my confusion is just like I went into the TV show with that mindset. I went into the musical with that mindset. And I'm just confused as to why like other people didn't go into the TV show with that mindset. And maybe it's just like the run of a TV show is longer than a 2-hour play. So maybe people thought they could do more, especially like it's Disney, it's streaming, why, make the episodes longer kind of thing. But I guess I'm just confused about like the selective outrage of changes being made to the canon.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just personally am someone who I actually really appreciate when an adaptation makes a case for its existence by not just being a carbon copy of whatever it's adapting. So I feel like I am just in general a little bit more gracious about things. I mean, obviously there are certain adaptations that I think just throw the baby out with the bathwater and just completely miss the point, not to allude to any.
Not to allude to two specific ones.
Movies that are about a demigod.
Yeah, we could pick 1492 examples if we needed to.
Right. But yeah, I do think it's interesting that it seems like there definitely were fans who thought that it would be, especially with Rick and Becky being involved, that it would be we are basically just watching the movie we created in our heads while reading. And I understand to a certain extent people having critiques, but at the same time, I mean, just to your point, even about making the episodes longer, I think something that people sometimes lose sight of, and that Rick and Becky, not to speak for them, but in my experience, feel really passionate about, is these books were originally for middle school kids and a little bit younger. The TV show is geared towards people who fit into that demographic. And obviously there's stuff that they've done to engage a wider audience as well. But I understand that, fans who are in their 20s might want to sit down and watch a 90-minute episode of a TV show.
Mm-hmm.
Your average Gen Alpha 11-year-old who is just getting into these, they're probably only used to watching half-hour, maybe 45-minute TV shows. So that's just one example where I'm like, I think you have to consider the full ecosystem of where the adaptation exists. But I go down a rabbit hole about that. So
totally. And I think I will be interested to see how the show develops with show length, because I had made that point on an episode, and then some people pointed out that there is examples of children's shows or shows that kind of do both, like Doctor Who, where the episodes are longer.
Yeah.
So I'll be interested to see how it develops. At the end of the day, I agree with your main point that I think when there are some changes that at least feel like they make sense, I like that. I liked that the Spider-Man PlayStation 4 video game made Norman Osborn the mayor. That's cool. I like that the sequel made Harry Venom instead of the random Eddie Brock photographer guy.
Right.
I would much rather have Venom be someone we actually care about. I think when changes are made that serve a purpose, I am okay with them. And when changes are not made, just, when just pulling something out of thin air, when someone goes to say the Pantheon in Tennessee instead of the Arch in St. Louis for no particular good reason.
Right.
Just as an example, that doesn't, excite me as much.
Totally.
So another change, they end up just taking a bus all the way to LA. I think going on with the theme of basically turning the whole quest to get to LA into a montage, it makes sense. And to take a bus the rest of the way there works. While they're on this bus, Percy passes out again, and he overhears Luke talking to Kronos, but you can't see that it's Luke, so it's that classic dream sequence. Right. And then you have Kronos telling Luke to remember Thalia, which is fun. I like her getting introduced into the musical as well, because I think this might have been her first mention, so I still like that we're getting sort of the bigger picture stuff. We've got that with the little Bianca nod, and now Thalia. I think it's fun to have bigger picture things, and I understand now why people told me not to watch the musical until after I finished the books. They were like, there's some tiny little references that probably won't ruin it, but you might as well just wait.
Yes, and I am personally thankful that the TV show has settled once and for all how we should be pronouncing Thalia, because that, alongside how you pronounce Percy and Annabeth's ship name, which I'm not even going to say out loud.
Rick has said it out loud. He says Percabeth. On a recent press tour thing for the TV show, he said Percabeth. So much like him saying Thalia in a thing, which informed my decision, we all have to agree. His name isn't Perky Jackson. I don't understand. I know. And listen, I have heard every case, and I understand,
particularly from international fans who, in their native language, that is the sound the letters make together. But Yeah, but one of the most difficult questions that I faced during my time as mixed thief was how do you pronounce Talia? And I'll admit, I had been saying Talia, and then as soon as they mentioned her in the
I
TV
think
show,
the musical says Talia, right?
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And that was part of it. I was like, well, if we're saying it that way in the musical, then I guess
I
that's
gotta
not how
follow
it
the
is.
old company line here.
Yeah. Yeah, especially because I was like faceless and sort of nameless. I was like, I can't have an opinion that deviates officially. But yeah, so once they said it in the show, I was like, all right, it is officially Thalia.
And that's another one that I have to come to accept is a Mr. Brunner, Mr. Bruner thing.
Yes.
Because I always thought the movie was wrong. And then the TV show, they said Bruner. And someone had DM'd me on social media that they know the actual Mr. Bruner from Texas that inspired the namesake. And he spells it that way, but says Bruner. So like,
Yeah,
I just have to, I really have to come to grips with it. It feels so wrong, but
I agree.
I got to admit defeat.
Right.
When Percy wakes, he asks Grover about Thalia, and Grover says that he hasn't heard that name in a while and is embarrassed about it. And then he sings a song about the tree. Again, not necessarily my favorite song, but I still, understand it's a musical. So you're going to sing about important emotional moments. But it tells the story, and we also do see a flashback of that moment happening above, which is pretty cool. Then they get to DOA Records, and we get just this absolutely fun play on Charon where it's just diva, Motown, soul singer vibes, and I just love it. Charon bursts into a song even though the trio says they don't want to hear it, and I really liked that song. I thought it was really fun, and I think I extra enjoyed it because it was like, I'm going to sing a song, and they were like, please don't, and then they did. It's really fun. I really enjoyed this one.
I love that song so much. And again, it's an incredible opportunity where you get to see the other ensemble members like playing all of these different roles that are not their lead role, so to speak. And again, it's just all these quick shifts and funny bits. It's such a good moment.
So when they get down into the underworld, the trio is asked if they want any music to play. And I don't know if it was Percy or Grover. Someone asks, do you have any Josh Groban? And then they say, we will eventually, which is such a fun thing where like at the moment in time, it was like, oh, Josh Groban, like so sweet and fun. This is a fun joke to imagine him being in hell. And then my most recent experience with Josh Groban is seeing him as Sweeney Todd. It's like, well, right. We've entered new Josh Groban territory.
Yes. Yeah.
Then in the underworld, we get DJ Cerberus, which is a fun bit, like very down for it, especially because like at the time when the play was coming out, like that is very much when we had the phase of like DJs that wore things over their heads, where we've got like Daft Punk and Marshmello and Deadmau5 and all that stuff, like to play and lean into that of the time thing. I was like, oh, right. That was a mid 2010s thing or, late 2010s thing. Jeez.
Yeah, it feels like a very clear placement in time.
It's really solid. So the Schubes then try to drag Percy into the pit. Grover chews them off. I loved this change. It's so funny. It's such a funny change to add in. And if that was the reason that they had Percy have the shoes in the Medusa thing, like just to add that one moment, I'm all for it because it's so hilarious to me.
Yeah, I loved that. And again, just like they had to do so much like funny physical acting because of course these shoes, like the pretending that they're moving, it's just them. I just love that moment, especially because it's like such a heavy, intense moment, and they really break it up with the absurdity of Grover chewing off the shoes.
A+. Percy then hears the deep voice, and then Annabeth says, guys, I think this pit is Tartarus. And Percy says, like the fish sauce. Great. Especially because like I don't think that's an exact rip from the book, but it's definitely of Percy because there's certainly been times where Annabeth says a thing and then he asks like the this, and it's just like that Greek phrase sounds like a normal thing. So like it felt true to form. So a very, very solid joke to throw in there.
Yes, I love that one.
Annabeth knows that Kronos is down in Tartarus. Percy asks what Kronos wants with his shoes, and Grover says, yeah, they were really cool shoes. And Annabeth wonders if it's not the shoes, and then pulls out the bolt. Percy wonders how it got in there. Percy is suspicious of Annabeth for knowing it was back there, which I think is an interesting thing to include. He wonders if Annabeth is the betraying friend, but Annabeth assures him that it is not her. So Percy knows that someone is trying to pit the big three against each other, but he's confident that it's not Hades. And then Hades comes and introduces himself and says, everyone always thinks that he's the bad guy. And then says, I wonder if it's the decor. Fantastic. Fantastic. And I don't know if anyone knows what it is, but his southern sassy voice, the actor who plays Hades in so many other roles, he's Chiron and Medusa, his deep voice is so great. But whatever southern sassy voice he used for Hades sounded so familiar, like it was from a character.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I Google, is this guy from something? Because this is such a particular familiar sounding voice to me.
It's his send-up of Paul Lynde.
Okay.
Who is I was not super familiar with prior to this, but he was a game show panelist and a comedian.
Okay.
And he had his own show. And he was super campy and snarky, and that is where he pulled that from.
Okay.
So
I still don't think that's the reference, but I wouldn't be surprised if whatever I'm thinking of, which I feel like is from a cartoon. I don't know why I thought it was Fairly Odd Parents. I was but it's not Doug Dimmadome, owner of the Dimsdale Dimmadome. There's something, there's some other voice that's like that. So if anyone knows, please let me know. But I just loved that particular choice for Hades. And it was really, really fun. Just like a sassy Elvis. Just great. It's really good. So Hades says that now he wants the bullet since it's here, and it feels true to form of what happens in the book. Annabeth says that they want to prevent a war, not start a war. Percy says that there's no way in hell, and then has to take a beat and goes, oh.
Yeah.
I love the leaning in to the dad jokes. A+. Then continues, there's no way in hell that we will hand it over to you. Hades says, quote, not even exchange for her, and then shows the shade of Sally. And then Percy sings a song about his dad maybe being a screw up as well, but then recalls the shell, and then he blows into it and forms a portal, and then they escape through the portal. So, we've got a switch, similar thing of Pearl, but, done in a slightly different way that, feels like a change where it's not a huge deal, but gift from dad got us out of tough situation.
Right. This is I don't know for sure, but I think part of it is a seashell is a lot easier to see on stage.
Right.
Listening to a shell to hear the sea is such a thing for people, especially when you're a kid. So I think that's really where a lot of that change came from, is just kind of streamlining it and also it being this bigger thing that's easy to see.
Yeah. And it also works for the joke earlier, in the beginning when he has the dream and it's a seashell. That's funnier as a joke. And then you can utilize that as a thing as opposed to having a narrator come in and explain the pearls are one-time use escape from jail free cards. It's something that I think works in a streamlining perspective, just like you said.
Yeah, and I think thematically it ends up fitting into with the whole what belongs to the sea can always return, and that being a bigger overall glimpse into the lesson that Percy learns with regard to his dad. And
totally. Now, before we conclude the conclusion of the play, we'll take a quick break here. I have not taken our mid-roll break here, the lightning brief, as you'll hear some sponsors and stuff and some updates with the podcast, and then we'll get into the final portion of the play. Hello and welcome to the Lightning Brief. I believe the penultimate Lightning Brief. Next week's episode is our final episode about the musical, which I think is the last Lightning Thief thing I cover, unless I do some sort of episode about a Lightning Thief video game if one exists. I'm not sure, but regardless, let's get into some updates about the podcast. First, I want to thank everybody who attended the recent Patreon live stream we did. If you missed it, me, Robert from the Damn Meme Page, Stephen Parra, and Johnny Frolickstein basically did a table read of the original revised Lightning Thief movie script, which is just available on the internet. And if you join any TNO tier of the Patreon over at thenewestolympian.com/Patreon, you can watch a video replay with a live chat replay and everything of the four of us going through everything in the script that didn't make it to the movie and then acting out all of the parts. It was fun. It was ridiculous. It was chaotic. It is unhinged what was not brought into the movie. This is the script that sparked Rick to write the very angry email with all of the commentary about how it's too crude and you're losing the audience potentially. That's this draft, and it's wild. It's wilder than I could have ever anticipated, and if you go to thenewestolympian.com/Patreon, you can watch it. Other updates with the podcast, our Heroes of Olympus coverage begins on April 15th. So next week is our interview with Joe Trace, who wrote the book for the musical and 2 episodes of the TV show, and then we get into Heroes of Olympus. That first episode is going to be from the live stream that we did. If you want to get the video version of the live stream, it will be live on the merch store, so you can not only hear that episode, but you can watch it if you missed it. And then we're also having special Heroes of Olympus stickers that will be up on the merch store. So if you go to thenewestolympian.com/merch, I will be working on getting those live during this week. If you're listening to this the week it came out. And then we're getting into Heroes of Olympus territory. If you go to thenewestolympian.com/about, you can always stay up to date with the exact schedule, but we're going to cover chapters 1 and 2. Then we have a very special episode to cover chapter 3, where we may or may not also be interviewing Walker Scobell, maybe potentially. And then also I was going to take April 29th off as a 5 Monday in a month, take that 5th Monday off type thing. But as you may have seen on social media, I was able to interview Charlie Bushnell, who played Luke in season 1 of the TV show. So that will take the place of a week off because it's not as much work to put those interview episodes together, and there's no better time for me to really slate it in, and I want everyone to be able to hear that. And both of those are also going to be on the TNO YouTube channel. So if you just search for The Newest Olympian, you'll find us on YouTube, and I will be putting up video versions of the calls that I did with Walker and Charlie as well. So lots of fun, exciting stuff on the horizon in the month of April for TNO. Now, I mentioned the Patreon. I want to give a shout out to the folks who've joined most recently. So shout out to our newest God tier patron, Jay Coos, and shout out to our newest demigod tier patrons, Alexia, Marama, the Frosty Tadpole, and Kale. Thank you all so much for your support. May Demeter bless you when you buy produce from the grocery store. It stays fresh and doesn't go bad. Now, if you're all caught up on the Newest Olympian and you're looking for some new content to consume, I make a whole bunch of content. I'm an independent podcast boy, and I make a bunch of podcasts, but even beyond the podcasts that are publicly available, if you want special behind the scenes extra stuff, you should check out the TNO Patreon. I put up bonus episodes once a month. If you're at the bonus episode tier, I put up director's commentaries quite frequently. My notes are there. We do monthly Q&A live streams. There are those stream type events like the one that I mentioned earlier in this mid-roll break that we do about every quarter. So there's lots of fun stuff there. I'm going to be putting up new bonus episodes soon. I might do audio from some of the live shows that we did that won't be on the feed for a long time because they're about spin-off books and stuff. So maybe you can get a little early access to stuff. When I'm coming up with new merch ideas, sometimes I'll run it by patrons for advice and stuff. So there's a lot of really cool things on the Patreon. And you also get access to everything I ever posted on the Potterless Patreon, which is 5 years worth of stuff. You get access to all of that. If you join any of the TNO tiers, you also get access to the Discord, which is a ton of fun, a thriving, active community with a bunch of really nice people and a bunch of channels that are about the books, and some are about past where I've gotten in the story, and then some are just off-topic stuff, and it's really fun and wholesome. And I love all the stuff that comes along with the Patreon and the patron community. And of course, you can get access to it at thenewestolympian.com/Patreon. Now, unless you are listening on Patreon, where you get ad-free episodes and early release episodes, you are going to hear some sponsors who help make this wild job of mine possible. They make me being a full-time podcaster a reality. And some of the ads will be read by me. Others of them won't be. The ones that aren't read by me are inserted locally. So if you live in Serbia, don't be surprised if you hear an ad in Serbian. But once those ads are complete, we'll get back to this episode of The Newest Olympian. And we're back, and we have our trio leaving the underworld and recognizing that Ares is behind this. Percy recognizes that Ares wants a war. He's the god of war, very similar to his aha moment in the book. And the other two then join in the song that Percy is singing, saying that they want to help as well. And then Ares comes in, and everyone fights Ares, which I think is interesting. I think that was a fun change just in terms of like, I don't know. I think it's something that if you can't have Percy very visibly show that he has like incredible newfound skills from Poseidon's help, and also because Percy hasn't had a lot of training necessarily. I think it does make more sense to have it be a 3-on-1 fight, because it was something I was wondering in the TV show before. In episode 8, we get the like previously on where he is, shown sword training with Luke.
Right.
When I was watching the musical, I was like, all right, he's had like maybe 30 seconds of here's how to hold a sword properly with Annabeth. Like there's no way he can take down Ares. So I think having it be a 3-on-1, though it made me a little sad because the Ares Percy fight is always so fun to me, I think it did make sense given like what led up to this moment so far in the musical.
Totally. And I think it also ties in, like, it really homes in on this message of this trio has really bonded and come together over the course of their quest. And I think that is a bit of the message that we're leaning into a little bit more. Plus, not to jump ahead, but I think it also sets us up for Percy's next fight that he does go through alone, being that much more dramatic because it's his first fight on his own. I think when you have the separation of the book or even a screen that you're watching it through, and when you can also see that like 12-year-old Walker is fighting the Edge, that feels so big that feels epic in that way. But if you're watching James and Chris fight each other, it's like you're relying entirely on emotional impact as opposed to that like bigness of you just took down a god.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think it tracks. The other thing that I'm just realizing is the same actor, James, plays Ares and Luke.
Right.
So he's going to come in and it's Percy versus this guy. Percy versus this guy wearing different clothes. Ooh.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think that does make sense in terms of the emotion. And I'm sure it felt different, like being there actually in the seats. I was only able to allegedly watch a slime tutorial because there's no New York Public Library historical recording, which I was devastated.
Yeah. We're all devastated.
But I don't get it. What I was told as a newbie to theater appreciation was people were like, oh yeah, anything that's ever been on Broadway is recorded. And I was like, all right, got the library card, going to sign up to reserve. And then it wasn't there. So I had to allegedly resort to alleged other means.
Right.
Allegedly.
A slime tutorial from the gods.
Yes. Thank you, gods. Thank you. So we have the team fighting. While they're fighting, Percy asks which demigod is helping. Percy then is able to summon the ocean to conquer Hades, and it's just him using 2 toilet paper leaf blowers with the team each using 1. So I love that coming back. Based on the audience reaction, it still probably was really cool. Like, I think it looked fun on the screen. I went to a Green Day concert once when I was in high school where they used toilet paper shooters, and like it does look cool. Like when they stream out, like even though it's a low budget, simple effect, like it's pretty fun. So I think having 4 of them going off is still cool.
Yeah, that was definitely, and it, like the toilet paper would actually like go out into the audience at that moment, and so you would see like little like tiny hands reaching up and grabbing to like try to catch a piece of it.
Someone somewhere has a clump of toilet paper proudly on display in their bedroom. They're like, this toilet paper is from, and then their mom threw it out one day. It's like, Mom, no, it's my lightning thief toilet paper. How
I think he's the editor of American Theater Magazine. Actually, like took his 2 sons to the show, and he was like, say what you will about this show, but my boys are sitting on the subway now, like clutching these pieces of toilet paper like they are prized possessions. So
yeah, look, that's what it's all about. Like even with the critiques of the TV show as well, I have a friend who has a 11-year-old who's like, he watched the show, now he's reading all 5 of the books. Like awesome, so cool, cool.
Yes.
So then Poseidon comes in via his dolphin assistant, which I learned from my interview with Chris that the loud dolphin noises were to mask the loud clangs that you have to do to lock the wheels of the staircase in place. And then they just rolled with it. Great. And what I really appreciated is I think out of every iteration of a Percy Jackson Lightning Thief adaptation, the musical does the best job of Poseidon being like a good guy, but not too good of a guy. Like, I think the movie was way too nice about him. The TV show, I think, verged even into like a little bit too much of like, we like Poseidon a little too much. He's kind of not the best in the book. And I think they made him a little bit of a doof in the musical. And I think it was very fun.
Yeah, I love like how deeply different the musical characterization of Poseidon is from the TV show. I'll admit, the scene between Poseidon and Sally when he like meets her at the bar, it's like very you came, you called. I mean, I folded like a lawn chair. So
Yeah.
so I'm interested to see what they do with that. But I also love this like completely different approach from the musical.
Yeah. I think with the TV show, we'll have to see. It might just be one of those things where it's like, okay, maybe TV show Poseidon's just a little bit nicer, and and that can be just a different interpretation.
Just so winsome.
So then we have Poseidon explaining the whole Smelly Gabe thing, and then he explains to Percy that he can stay at camp or go back to Sally. And just when you think he's being really nice, he does end. Still, I'm sorry you were born.
Just so. And what an insane but incredible line.
But also believable for the gods. Like
100%.
I wouldn't put it past any of the Percy Jackson gods to say something like this.
So on brand.
Percy's reunited with Sally. Poseidon and Sally have a bit of a scene. And then we get another comedic thing where Percy goes, oh, so that's my dad. And then Sally goes, that's yo dad. Like, it's like, whoa, raunchy Sally. All right. Okay. Percy gives her the box with the Medusa head in it. Then we have Percy singing a song about where to go next. Amazing. Really solid stuff from Chris.
I love that The Last Day of Summer is probably like, I've always hesitated to pick, but I think honestly it might be my favorite song in the entire show. I've long said my favorite part in the entire show is like Luke's reprise of Good Kid. But honestly, I think that the whole song, but I feel like I'm jumping ahead a little bit. So
no, it's fine. We're about to get there because Percy then talks to Luke, who is still unsure of who the demigod that helped was, and he's trying to figure out how Cronus factors into everything. And Luke says that his return from his quest is similar to how Percy feels returning from his. And then Luke just like gives it up. Like he just kind of just is like, yeah, it was me. And then Percy's like, you're the lightning thief. And then Luke, I get why they kind of have to do it, but he does feel a little bit like movie Luke, where he's a little bit more of just like, we get less of the intricacies of like the Hermes and all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
And it's more of just like, I can do a better job, which isn't like my favorite take on Luke, but I also understand how that kind of has to be a bit more simplified. If you're going to get into like the bigger picture Luke, like it's going to take a lot of time to develop.
Totally. I think that's why I love that little reprise so much because, we don't get to see Hermes. We don't get to see their relationship. Speaking of changes that they made in the TV show, I love that they gave us more insight to that relationship so much earlier on. But when he says it doesn't pay to be a good son is just, it gets me every time. And I feel like that moment really encapsulates how small the demigods often feel against the largesse of their, not only the regular universe, but then the fact that the universe is being controlled by their parents and they are such tiny pieces, and how it feels like it doesn't matter if you do all the right things. You can still be ignored, still be left behind, still not be good enough. And I love that juxtaposition of Percy and Luke's characters there. And it's the kind of thing that it hints on. I agree with you. I wish we could get more development of Luke there. And because you can see that there's so much complexity there. And then it's also and we got to wrap this up.
Right. It feels like a thing where if you know, and if you know the story, you're like, oh, you've nailed it. But I was trying to think of myself, if I'd just seen this musical and not known the story, I feel like I would have been a little bit oh, well, he just kind of seems like, your classic, I could take over the world villain.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
We'll just have to see when they get, an extra musical. If anything, why does the Harry Potter play get 2 days? Give us 2 days of a Percy Jackson play. Right. Then we can have all the stuff. So then Annabeth shows up and I was like, oh my goodness, did the musical inspire the TV show's change that I absolutely loved? Where Annabeth comes in the fight. I know Joe wrote a couple of the episodes, so I wonder if that was a discussion. I'll have to ask. I'm interviewing Joe later. I'll have to ask Joe, did John and anyone else on the writing team see what you do with the musical and be like, ooh.
Yeah, because there definitely are other little musical moments that he put in there.
Annabeth comes in, she gets Luke to stop. He pulls the Thalia card again, and then Annabeth does a little like fake out, like fake love thing to get his sword, which I think is fun. And then Luke just like hits Percy with a poison dagger and runs away. And I was like, yeah, it's no more silly than Scorpion. So fine. Easier to do than to have a tiny scorpion, sure. And then we have Percy suffering from the poison, Annabeth caring for him. We get the mention of seaweed brain. So everyone's like, yes, she said the thing. And then Percy does reply with the wise girl. So that's very fun. And then, of course, Grover interrupts them looking like they're about to kiss just as it's about to happen. And Grover says that the squirrels all across the Northeast will go after Luke. And I just love thinking of like the squirrel network.
Yes.
Just spread across. Fantastic. Percy then resolves not to stay at camp, but instead to face monsters head on in the real world. And then they all sing about a war being on the horizon, but giving it their all despite it. And it's Bring on the Monsters, which I think is a really fun one to end the show with. I thought it was a good note. And it's also a good, like, let's get the whole cast in the mix song.
Yes.
And in particular, I loved the general vibe of the music being more like rock-ish the whole time. But as someone who plays the drums in this song slapped. Like it was just, in particular, the drums at the end, just like that felt such like a nice, percussive, emotional, musical moment to end it on. And then Percy ends the song saying that he'll be back next summer. And that's the end of the Lightning Thief musical.
Yeah. Oh, man. And in pretty much every video that I've ever taken of the end of that song, you can hear me crying.
That was something, I think it was also in the New York Times article. It was like, Ashlee was also known for sobbing on stage when receiving her Tony Award.
Yes.
I just love that your brand is tears and sass.
And honestly, that my brand is tears. Tears and sass. Our flag means crying.
Oh, gosh. Speaking of tears, where's the season 3? Gosh, what have they taken from us? Why? I hate you, David Zaslav. Why are you doing this to us? But that was the Lightning Thief musical. I will say overall, like even as someone who didn't love musicals, I loved it the longer it went on. Like early on, I was like, oh man, everyone's singing about their feelings and singing about what they're doing. Like this just feels super textbook. But then as it kept going, I enjoyed it more. I still don't know that I'm like gonna pop it on as a fun watch just to like kill some time. But I did enjoy watching it. And I just appreciate knowing like what went into it, like talking to Chris, talking to you, and I'm sure after I talked to Joe, just like the phenomenon of the thing becoming what it became is just so cool to me. And I think that that's okay to appreciate something more if you know like what went behind it. I think that's why I like the TV show so much, is I was fortunate to interview a bunch of people and I knew like what went into it. And just like, yeah, it's a show made by a bunch of nice people. I'm going to give it a little more leeway.
Totally.
Same thing with this musical. Like, I think the more I learn about it and just like how unexpected parts of the journey were and how like unconventional was, like, oh, well, nobody records things this way and nobody does a tour and then a Broadway show and then nobody does like it. Like there's so many things that were like, it wasn't supposed to happen this way. It just makes me love it. So like, even if I'm not the biggest fan of musicals in general or this one in particular, I love everything that this stands for and everything that it became. It's such a cool landmark in the fandom.
I have to agree. Obviously, I'm biased. But yeah, I mean, I think that really gets at the heart of what everybody who worked on the show hoped for, is that even the people who it might not be top of their list, that they would understand what the intention was and would be aware that like we knew what the show was and embrace that. Thank you for embracing it.
Yeah, of course. I love shows like Puffs and like this, where because it is more of a simple production, local theaters can do it, schools can do it.
Yes.
And I think that's so cool, especially for something around a fandom. Like Puffs with Harry Potter, this with Percy Jackson. You can be a big fan of the books, and then your middle school can put on a production of it, and you can live out your dreams of being Annabeth.
100%.
And that's awesome.
Yes.
It's so cool that exists, and there's not like a huge barrier to entry of having to have a giant plant if you want to do Little Shop of Horrors, you know?
Totally. I think that is something that both Joe and Rob really thought about all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the published edition of the script, at the beginning, there's a casting note that says that anybody can play any of these roles, and they have like little adaptations they've made to the sheet music to make it more adaptable to different ranges. but they say anybody can play these roles. I'm butchering it and paraphrasing it, but like basically that anybody can be a hero, anybody can be a god and a goddess. And so it's been really so cool to see productions that are like, all right, Percy's being played by a girl, or the entire trio are all girls or non-binary kids or kids of color. Like it's just like really exciting to see that spirit continue on. And I think that that's going to be the long-term legacy of the show. It was always for the fans, and now it really is.
Awesome. Well, Ashlee, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. If people want to find you doing stuff, where can they find you doing stuff? You have a book that recently came out, right?
Yes. So I have a picture book, Francis Discovers Possible, that is out wherever books are sold. And I was hoping that this other announcement would have come out before we taped, but I will have some novel-shaped news very soon, I believe.
Okay.
In the YA fantasy fairy tale space.
If that happens in between recording and publishing, shoot me an email and I can put in some voiceover after the fact where I'm like, everyone go buy Ashlee's new book, pre-order from bookshop.org.
Thank you. In the meantime, people can find me most easily on Instagram. I'm on there as @AshleeLaurenNicole.
Cool. Great. Yes. And as we had a brief Instagram exchange today, I'm excited to see what your Fitbit thought that podcasting was, since they thought you teaching was swimming.
I took it off. Because I literally at the beginning, I was like, as I put my hand up, I was like, oh, wait, I need to take this off so it doesn't give me false steps.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. I talk so much with my hands. I can only imagine what they would think I have done when I podcast. Who could tell? Well, Ashlee, thank you so much for joining. Listeners, thank you for listening. And until of course, and until we cross paths again, until I put something on the feed, which I think will be my interview with Joe Trace. Until then, I'll see you later. Hi, thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Newest Olympian. This podcast is created, hosted, and produced by me, Mike Schubert. I also run the social media and the website. Our editor is Sherry Guo. The music is by Bettina Campamanes and Brandon Krugel, and the art is by Jessica E. Boyd. If you enjoy the show and you can't get enough, you can head on over to thenewestolympian.com/Patreon, and you can get access to a whole bunch of bonus content. You can also find us on social media. We're at Newest Olympian on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and there's a subreddit, reddit.com/r/thenewestolympian. If you want to support the show with some TNO merch, you can go to thenewestolympian.com/merch. And if you want to see if we've got a live show coming to a city near you, head on over to thenewestolympian.com/live. I mentioned that Patreon earlier. Let's give a shout out to our producer level patrons: Kelsey Gillespie, The Damn Steam Nuggets, Vicky Garcia, Veronica Bartova, Frida Vikstrom, Megan Moon, Craig McRoberts, Taylor Payne, Sabrina Balsiger, Boney Pony, Polly Burge, Nikki Harris, Tatiana Schmidt, Sandra Rose, Josh Sayer, Josh Wilkie, Abby Ryan, Ashton Gabrielson, Margot Redhouse, Sam Reeby, Riley Kiddes, Mrs. O'Leary, Milo Kim, Sandkopf, Julia Kendall, Rick A, John Drielsma, Rayla Matthews, Luna Cadoon, Sky Mallory, Percabeth, Aiden Parziani, Biggest Tyson Fan, King Bastion, One Damn Distraction Coming Up, Ginger Spurs Boy, A Cup of Solace, Meg Roy, Olivia Krinicki, Bradamus Prime, Kibo Guy, Skylar Sisters, Demigod Nurse, Zachary Hamilton, Scott Sheldon, Sophie, Natanya Page, and M. Thayer Cohen, Finley McLeod, Sarah Elise Arnson, and Bella. If you want to support the show in a non-monetary way, word of mouth helps the podcast so much. Whether you reach out to someone directly and say, hey, there's this podcast called The Newest Olympian. It's about Percy Jackson. I think you would really like it. Whether that person is a Percy Jackson superfan or someone you're trying to convince to get into the books. You can also just talk about the show on social media. That helps. You could even just leave a rating and review on whatever podcasting app you're using. All of these things really help. I appreciate everyone who has already done so, and I appreciate anyone who will do so in the future. But I'm just so thankful that you tuned into this episode, and I hope you tune into our next episode where we will be joined by Joe Trace to talk about writing the Lightning Thief musical as well as parts of the TV show. But until then, I'll see you later. Hey everyone, how's it going? It's me, ASMR Mike. So I do some knickknacks here in the studio, and one of them is your classic magic 8-ball. So for this segment, I'm going to shake it and see what the results are. As always, I will hope that I get don't count on it, which is my favorite part of Toy Story. Okay, here we go. I got, as I see it, yes. I got my sources say no. I got reply hazy, try again. All right, let's see if I can get don't count on it. Well, Andy, pick me. Yes. I mean, that would be good for Woody, but it's not what I was looking for. Anyway, thank you so much for listening.